Farewell and adieu to you, fair Spanish ladies.
Farewell and adieu to you, ladies of Spain.
For we've received all.
The British Empire may not have technically ruled the world, but it was, in fact, the largest empire to exist at any point throughout history. Reaching across the globe and carrying on over multiple centuries, the British Empire owes its success and ability to expand so widely. The geographical position of Great Britain served as a major advantage to the growing empire. Given that the nation was an island, the likelihood of being invaded or conquered was somewhat lower than a country that was surrounded on all sides by foreign powers. Although Britain was not completely immune to incursions, it definitely benefited geographically, both in terms of external threats and when it came to any border disputes. Britain had a pretty clear and straightforward border between itself and any other nations. While Scotland and England split the landmass that was bilaterally united with the ascension of Scotland's King James VI to the throne of England in 1603, both states would together make up the nation of Great Britain by 1707, sharing their outward borders with nothing but the North Atlantic Ocean and the North Sea. This open position, with easy access for maritime expeditions, also gave Great Britain an upper hand when it came to reaching other countries and continents. Needing only to cross over foreign land when they wished to reach countries more inward on their continent, the Brits were able to sail to just about any coastal nation without much resistance. Still, oceanic adventures would not have been so effortless for the British Empire without a strong naval fleet. This is where the size and power of the Royal Navy became a center point of British success. While Great Britain did not always control the world's oceans, the reason they began to skyrocket as an unignorable maritime power by the 18th century is largely due to the fact that they invested more money in ships and guns than other naval forces. The government and citizens of the British Empire truly believed that the future of their wealth was to be found through the ocean. Recognizing the importance of overseas trade, as well as a fleet that could also defend their land if ever required, the Brits made sure to adequately fund the Royal Navy. The Empire's focus on trade additionally contributed vastly to its triumphant transcontinental growth. Intent more on gaining wealth and increasing trade than on consolidating power through conquest, the Brits were able to create a more desirable environment for others to become a part of. After the successful colonization attempts in North America and the West Indies during the 1600s, the British Empire began to establish a commercial system that allowed for exponential success within Great Britain and its overseas territories. Colonies were granted monopolies for their products in the British market, and therefore were to conduct trade via British ships. In 1651, the Navigation Act would prompt the development of a closed economy between the empire and its colonies, thus creating a system where all colonial imports were required to come from Great Britain and all colonial exports were to be sent directly to the British market by the way of British ships. During the same century, the British East India Company was established as a means of trade between Great Britain, East Asia, Southeast Asia, and India. Initially focused on the spice trade, the East India Company later incorporated other goods such as silk, cotton, tea, opium, and more. Politics made its way into the company later on, despite the origin being purely based on establishing more trade opportunities. Driven limitlessly by the concept of controlling a global trade market, the British Empire continued to extend its reach across the continents of Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, and the Americas. While the process of colonization varied from territory to territory, one thing that remained consistent was the form in which these expeditions began. Unlike other empires who chose to expand through the use of military might and sovereign claims to power, the British facilitated most of their expansion through the establishment of trading posts and systems. Nonetheless, the British Empire was not a completely non-violent authority. On top of the Anglo-Dutch and Anglo-Spanish wars near the start of British expansion, the empire also engaged in conflict with its American colonies during the American Revolutionary War, later followed by the dissension in India, succeeding the decline of the Mughal Empire, and leaving the British East India Company as a prominent political power in the region. The presence of Britain in India was also notably more forceful than some of their other trade-focused enclaves, demonstrated by the expansion of the East India Company's power through the threat of violence against those who protested. The continued tensions between the British and French were no longer secluded in India either, as the 7 Years' War erupted in 1756, lasting until the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1763, leaving Britain as the leading power across India and the world's oceans. When the American Revolutionary War came in 1775, after the British Empire responded to the "no taxation without representation" movement of the Americans by sending troops to try and subdue the colonies, France and Spain chose once again to go to war with Britain, now as allies of the newly declared United States. In 1783, at the Peace of Paris, the British Empire was forced to acknowledge American independence, in turn relinquishing any control over their former colonies. Devising a new strategy after such a drastic loss of territory, Great Britain now turned its attention toward the continents of Asia, Africa, and Australia, marking what some historians call the beginning of the Second British Empire. Though trade between the United States and Great Britain actually continued after the installation of independence, the empire chose to utilize the uncolonized coasts of Australia, which had been discovered by a Dutch explorer, Willem Janszoon, in 1606, and later claimed for the British Crown by James Cook in 1770 under the name of New South Wales. Still feeding their fresh craving for expansion in South Asia, the British suddenly engaged in a series of conflicts after the Battle of Plassey, which had occurred in 1757. By 1774, the British Empire took on a chain of attacks. The Anglo-Mysore Wars were fought until 1799, followed by clashes with the Pindaris. Attacks on places like Sindh and Burma also accelerated the new consolidation efforts of the British East India Company, on top of what was referred to as the Doctrine Lapse, where the Brits forbid the ascension to the throne of any Hindu ruler if they were not the natural heir. Once the current Hindu leader either died or was removed in some way, the British would occupy his state and gain control. These acts by the British Empire, combined with other forms of forced westernization of the Hindus, led to the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857 to 1859. Tired of the current heavy-handed British rule, the Indian troops of Meru sparked a rebellion that would spread throughout the nation. Peace was finally declared in July of 1859, and the British East India Company was scrapped, although the empire maintained a level of control under the crown until 1947. During this span of time, Great Britain set about making its presence better known in Africa as well. Although the Royal African Company had been established back in the 17th century, finding ample profit in the slave trade until its abolition in 1807, it was not until the 19th century that the Brits realized the potential benefit of forming a trade route across Africa. With its eyes set on establishing outposts spanning from Egypt down to the southern half of the continent, the British Empire found itself in a race against the other growing European powers, such as Italy and Germany, which eventually led to the Berlin Conference. The conference, which occurred in 1884, was intended to create some harmony between the competing colonizers. Great Britain was ultimately awarded most of northeastern Africa and all of southern Africa, meaning that at its peak in the continent, the British Empire ruled over approximately 30% of the African population. Globally, at the height of Britain's domination, it controlled roughly 22 to 25% of the world's land surface, and by 1938, governed around 20% of the world's population. This remarkable prosperity was accomplished through a geographical advantage, supreme naval might, and the strategic focus on trade and wealth over bullish sovereign power for the sake of an emperor.